Welcome back to Les Schwab Tire Center's Outdoor GPS, presented by Fisherman's Marine and Outdoor. Now it's time for your weekend tech tip, brought to you by Chevy Silverado.
Welcome back, everyone. It's your Chevy Silverado tech tip of the week, and I can see the reel here. Hopefully I can do this without breaking my run. See the color of that reel right there? It matches my truck, my Silverado. Okay, we're all dumber for that. Okay, so the question was very specific. We got it through our Facebook page, so I thought it'd be a great tech tip. Was why do I talk about how I like to fish with a fixed float when I'm bobber dogging? Okay, now we're going to get to that in just a second. That actual setup, that rigging, and why I use that fixed float setup bobber dogging in just a few minutes. So let's start with what everyone already does, and the only situation that I actually use a sliding bobber setup. Okay, first thing, let's just start with the reel. When I'm using a slider, bobber dogging setup, in which a lot of people now think is the original way or the only way to bobber dog, which is totally incorrect, but perception is what it is. I've just got your basic level wind. This is one of my favorite ones just because it's fast, okay? I like a level wind on my rods when I am fishing out of the boat. This is the only time that I'm using this out of my sled in particular, not drift boats, nothing like that. Just when I'm running my sled, when we're free drifting, bobber dogging, and I'm the one that's got the tillers in my hand, I like a bait caster, okay? I actually carry 4 of these in my sled, all 4 of which for me. Okay, I have, of course, spinning reels for everyone else if that's what they wish to use. But I have 4 of these in the boat for myself. 2 right-handed reels, 2 left-handed reels. Now you're going to go, what in the world is that for? Because if I'm holding onto the kicker fishing the left side of the boat and I'm holding on to it with my left hand, I want to be able to go right over and click over or start reeling right away. You can actually manipulate these reels with one hand to lock it over while you're running the motor. I can do everything one-handed, okay? When I'm fishing the right side of the boat, starboard side, I'm terrible with that. Anyway, and I've got the kicker in my right hand. I want a right-handed reel, so it's easier for me to mend my line, and if my bobber does sink, I can set the hook and start right away reeling in. So it's just a preference thing. If you don't mind flipping your reel over and messing with it that way, that's fine. And a lot of times when I'm fishing out of the boat, you know, you break, well, there's a reason why I have 4 of them, right? Because you break stuff off, you're in the midst of a drift, you're not gonna, you know, always go back up and start pulling your stuff off rocks or limbs, whatever it might be, limbs, yeah? Sometimes that happens too, trees, whatever. You're gonna break off, right? You need to be able to pick up a rod and get back to fishing, and sometimes you get caught with the wrong reel, you know, for that particular side of the boat. It happens, but that's how I like to do it. That's just, again, my personal preference. The reason, again, why I use a sliding float out of the boat, it's easier for me to cast, okay? Because it's all the way down here by the weight. This particular case, when I'm free drifting or bobber dogging, I like these stick baits from Dave's Tangle Free. They just have great feel. They're not a mile long, which I haven't really grasped that concept yet, but I just really like how these feel as opposed to the ball that's available. But again, that's all personal preference. But again, it's easier for me to cast. I can be much more precise than, say, with the fixed float where I got a lot of line below it. Again, we'll talk about that. So this is what would be considered the normal or the average or what everybody else is using bobber dogging, right? And it is. It's the Arrow float. It's the medium size. The large is too big, okay? The small is okay in super thin, you know, low clear water conditions where everything's downsized. That other float, that small float from Arrow works great. I am not a fan of the cut down versions of these floats when they're on a slider. I like the longer version because once you get good at it, you can kind of manipulate that float as it's going down the river rather than what most people do, leave a giant bow in their line and have that thing tracking straight down river. A lot of times we'll take and get these bobbers sideways, okay, where we can actually speed things up by picking up the line, getting it off the water, and using the float as a buoy, I guess, you know, pulling on it a little bit more where you can straighten it out, let it go downriver, slow it down, get it sideways, speed it up. You know, when you're going through a little bit shallower water, whatever it might be, you get to a point where you can start messing with it and having it work for you as opposed to just casting it out there and holding on the rod and aimlessly watching your bow and your line. You can actually be a lot more effective. But again, we're not talking about technique, we're talking about how to set up, okay? So nothing fancy here, just a bobber stop up there. I do have another egg float bobber stop right here below the float, and that's actually just after getting the advice from Christopher Topolos. He was pretty specific that it does help save gear, and when you're in the boat, and if you were to break off at your swivel, it's nice not to have to worry about having to find a bobber and all that stuff to get re-rigged. So I did do that on a couple of these rods for the boat this year. This is what I spent my time yesterday doing, was rigging up everything for the sled. But very basic. So this is a boat setup for me, where most of the time when I'm in the boat, we're dragging, okay? Meaning that we are actually fishing. You know what, I'm not gonna do that with that rod. This is that Silver Widow from Edge, of course, the 1044-2. I mean, Ferrari. Yeah, I mean, you just can't get much better than that. Anyway, back to what I was saying. With this particular setup, I'm going to be dragging most of the time, okay? Meaning that my weight is on the bottom, the bobber's doing all the work. That is bobber dogging, okay? You're dragging along the bottom. Now, I do have friends that'll get in the boat, they'll fish with a fixed float, and they'll drag, but nowhere near as much as I am when I've got that float, that setup on. It's just two different ways to do what is called bobber dogging, right? Again, out of the boat, I'm dragging most of the time. Doesn't mean that we won't chandelier or let it, you know, kind of dangle so that the bead or bait or whatever might just dangle along the bottom without the weight touching. But 90% of the time, when I'm in the sled, I'm dragging. That's why I have that particular setup. Now, before we cut to a break, Alan, forgive me, I'm going to come back into the shot here. Here is the setup, the fixed float setup, okay? And I'm going to give you a little history lesson. How much time do I got? Okay. I'm rushing my own guy. This is an original West Coast float. There's a lot of different styles of floats out there. This is just one that you can actually peg with a toothpick. We've talked about this setup over the years several times, so this isn't anything new that at least that I'm bringing out here on my show. But this all started up in Canada, okay? It was called dink float fishing. It's been done since the 70s, 80s, forever, okay? This is nothing new. Everything that we're doing that we call bobber dogging down here in the States, we've just morphed into something that some think that they've invented. Man, I could go deep into that, but I'm not gonna. So we kind of changed that. We got exposed to this in the 90s when we had friends that were guiding up there. They came back dink float fishing, and we were like, holy moly, this is incredible, so effective compared to drift fishing. Main reason why it's so popular to this day. But those dink floats with braided line, because that's what we were fishing with back then, believe it or not, with the dink float, you'd set the hook on a fish or on a snag, and you would cut those things into shreds. And one of my good buddies, I believe it was Toby, I believe, or one of them, Matt, maybe? Anyway, it was like they switched over to this West Coast float where you can't hurt it, but it stays solidly fixed. There's a lot of advantages to this. When we come back from this break, I'll explain why I think those advantages are so important and why every single time I go bank fishing and I am going to be bobber dogging to any level, this is the only setup that I take with me. There is no slider whatsoever. We'll be back with that in just a couple of minutes.
Outdoor GPS is brought to you by Chevy Silverado and the impressive new Turbo Max engine. Flex your muscle with the strongest, most advanced Silverado ever. Official truck of Outdoor GPS.